All right. Hey, I'm really glad to have you here. It has been a wild, wild morning. A couple of things happening behind the scenes, maybe before you walked in the room, but I want to give some shout outs and honor where it is due. So about 9:45 this morning, the power went out in like a mile radius of our building. So like lights and houses and everywhere. And so our entire production team and worship team and volunteers were scrambling. So you might notice like subtle different things, like why are there little tea lights on the stage? And what's up with this piano that no one used? And what's really awesome is if you go into the bathrooms, you'll notice like camping lanterns. So you're like, oh, that's a nice touch, right? So just know that our team did an incredible pivot between 9:45 and 10:15. They were ready to rock church in the dark. It was like we're camping, but not really. It was going to be awesome. Everyone's filled with expectation. And then here's the lights. And so well done, team. Put your hands together for all of our team members. Incredible, incredible. Honestly, really, really impressive. So, hey, thank you, team, for being very joyful in the process. Everyone's just problem solving. They're ready to rock. It was actually going to be kind of fun. We talked about having like the largest hide and seek game we've ever had in the history of ever. But here we are, back with the lights on. So I'm really glad you guys are here. And thanks for joining us. Before we get into the message today, we are working through the gospel, the good news, the eyewitness account of Matthew, one of Jesus' closest friends. And it's been a beautiful journey starting in the summer. It'll carry us through December or till December, and then we'll move into a season of Advent. But as always, you can go back on our YouTube channel, our podcast, and pick up the work that we're doing. And then these are all being funneled through our city groups, which is awesome. Also, props to Michelle. Can we just put our hands together for her and all of her announcements? A lot of stuff, right? Like director of operations, she's got it down to a T, but I really appreciate the clear next steps, and thank you guys for helping us in that. Before we get into the message, a couple of quick things. Our mission, the reason we exist here at City Church, the reason we planted City Church 6 years ago was to help people find their way to God from where they are. And we do that by practicing the way of Jesus together in Boulder. So what that means for you is no matter where you're walking in on your spiritual journey, you are loved, you're safe, you're welcome. Really glad to have you here. Our prayer is that that is experientially true for you today, both from like a gatherings perspective right now, but also just one-on-one as you're meeting people and things like that. So whether you're in person or online, we're glad to have you. Our desire is to help you take some next steps and in your journey with Jesus. So glad to have you here. Does that sound good to everybody? Okay. Hey, big hoopla. We already had our Halloween community night, but Munchkin Masquerade was last week downtown on Pearl. We had tons of volunteers down there handing out candy and doing airbrush tattoos and stick-on tattoos, and we gave away some ridiculous amount of candy. Put our hands together for all of our volunteers. And thank you for your generosity. We had a ton of candy that we were able to give out and bless the community, offer prayer, serve people well. So thank you again for helping us in that. And really excited for the kickoff of this prayer room, guys. Who's been in the prayer room? Really, just a show of hands, kind of look around. Who's been in the prayer room before? Yes. Who has never been in the prayer room? Raise your hand for funsies. Oh yeah, look at that. Very good. Really glad to have you here. Isaac, it's so good to see you. Guys, everybody say hi to Isaac. We have two very nice-looking mustaches sitting together over here. Isaac has moved out of the state, but from experience, prayer room is pretty legit. Would you agree? Just like that. All right, very good. You heard it from the word of Isaac, so it's clearly trustworthy. I'm glad you're here, man. Sometimes I can't see faces, and like there's lights in my eyeballs, okay? So his mustache stood out to me. I was glad to see it. I have mustache envy, guys. Don't like... It's a real thing. It's okay. All right, deal with it. All right, hey, the prayer room. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to it. We have the first couple of hours, just in case you're wondering, already filled out 3 to 8 or 9. I saw a few straggling time slots even for the rest of the day. So again, if you haven't already, jump on the website, sign up for an hour. Again, you can check it out after the service like Michelle said. But man, it's going to be awesome. Can't wait to see how God's going to use it. We've been praying over that all week leading up to this space, and I can't wait to see what God does in and through us. Now, Matthew chapter 7, let's go back to the words of Matthew here. I'm sorry, the words of Matthew. Well, Matthew wrote it down. The words of Jesus here. He's been on this what's often called the Sermon on the Mount, his manifesto, if you will, of life in the kingdom. And he's beginning to land the plane. And like a good teacher, he's got some really clear points that he's making. And as he begins to land the plane, there's over the next 4 weeks, including today, you're going to see 4 different sketches, which for Jesus, they're going to underline the importance of our response to what's being heard. So obviously he's speaking to a first century crowd in this moment, but also for you and I as we listen to the words of Jesus. He is trying to help us not just listen to his words, but then put them into practice. And he's also going to help you and I weigh out the consequences of failing to respond. And so Jesus is pretty hardcore. I kind of dig that about Jesus. There's like awesome parts of Jesus where he's super compassionate and loving and inspiring and amazing. And there's other times where Jesus is pretty hardcore. And I think both of those are wonderful things to lean into. And so we're going to start to see some of those harder things that Jesus calls us into over the next couple of weeks. And again, Jesus is going to be offering direction. He's offering warning. He's going to give us a way today. So let's look at the words of Jesus here. Enter by the narrow gate. That is a command. So Jesus is being very clear. Anyone who wants to follow me, these are your instructions. Enter by the narrow gate. And then he's going to give an observation with consequence. For the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. So Jesus is giving instructions and consequence. Enter by the narrow gate, and then here's why. Is everybody tracking with me? There are, again, two opposite gates, if you will, that Jesus is going to lay out, two opposite ways, two opposite destinations, and two opposite groups of people. And this is intentional. This is not Jesus was lazy and he ran out of stories to tell, and so this is the best example he's got. This is Jesus leaving no room for decision fatigue. Anybody feel decision fatigue? Right? You have that like just periodically. You go to a restaurant. Anybody remember the Cheesecake Factory? Right? It used to be on Pearl Street, no more. I love the Cheesecake Factory, but part of it was, dude, it was like a menu a mile long. Right? You could spend 30 minutes just trying to figure out what am I going to do? It's Halloween season. Everyone's watching different, all the spooky things come out. I like, by the way, Michelle, you said scary like 10 times in your MC. And I feel like you're coming off the Halloween wave. I like that. So lots of scary things. But the prayer room's not one of them, nor is the prayer team. I love it. But man, Cheesecake Factory, like decision fatigue, overload, like which cheesecake there's 150 to choose from. I don't know. Jesus doesn't leave room for that. There is no room for what Jesus has for us today and leading over the next couple of weeks for decision fatigue, which is a gift for you and I. And what's interesting is Jesus' teaching is going to increasingly and almost wildly become challenging and more personal. I think a helpful way to summarize it would be Jesus is now, as he's taken some pretty hard teaching already, it's not like they've been softballs by any means, but as he makes it more and more personal, he's saying, I don't want my teaching just to be praised. I want it to be put into practice. I don't want my teachings to be commended. I want you to carry out what's been commanded. It's a very serious call for those who call Jesus Rabbi and Lord and Savior, for his followers to practice his way. And what's beautiful is Jesus wants to see God's way and God's word and the life that God has on offer be set loose in our lives that will lead to transformation from the inside out. And so as we talk about it today, Jesus has on offer life and life to the full. Jesus said the enemy, the devil, came to kill and to steal and to destroy, but I have come. The purpose of my coming, Christmas is right around the corner where we celebrate Advent, where we celebrate the coming of the one sent by God to save his people from their sins. He says, the reason I have come is that you might have life. And not just life, but life to the full, abundant life, spilling over life. And here's what I believe. Everyone in the room, part of the reason we're here is, it's not like we had anything better to do. Happy Daylight Savings Time, by the way. Do you feel a little more refreshed this morning? Anybody caught off guard by it? No one showed up early, which I noticed. That was, that didn't happen. But a little more refreshed, a little more awake, right? And Jesus is like, listen, you didn't end up here by accident. You're not sitting under his words by accident. It's not like you have something, nothing better to do, so might as well give it a shot. Everyone in the room, and I would argue everyone on the planet, is looking for life, like abundant life. And many times we are putting to the test the claims of the culture and the ways around us. There are many ways that we can give this effort at life a chance, and we're kind of putting the litmus test up to it, say, is this going to work? Does the American dream deliver? Do relationships deliver? Does money deliver? Does hedonism and just experience, will it deliver? Does the way of Jesus deliver? Does spirituality have something to offer in general? Is there a more narrow way? We're looking for life. And I think what we're going to find today is that Jesus' invitation into life is a vital invitation, which is why he doesn't give us the opportunity to have decision fatigue. But additionally, I think we're going to find that maybe Jesus' definition of life and life to the full doesn't always line up with our surface level desires, but it is going to speak more deeply to the reality of the human condition than you and I could ever hope for at our own grasping and our own effort. And I believe it changes us in such a way from the inside out that once you've tasted and once you've seen, then there's nothing else. Like, of course, for many of you are followers of Jesus in the room, and you've tasted and you have seen, and you're similar to some of his other followers, where everyone else is leaving him, and Jesus looks at them and he says, are you going to leave too? And they say, where else would we go? Who else has the words of life? I think there's a longing in the human condition to find that answer. Many of you have found that answer, and the greatest battle and work of your life is now just like coming back to that answer over and over again, not settling for less. And many of you are actively probing up against that answer. And so I think Jesus has good news for us today in that manner. Now, Jesus is here to talk about narrowness as if it is good news, which I find really ironic because in the cultural context that we live in, narrowness is not good news. Would you agree? Like most things that are narrow, we're like, absolutely not. Like no one wants to be called narrow-minded, right? Like I don't know, to my knowledge, no one has ever used that in a compliment way. Like, oh, you're so narrow-minded. I just don't think I've ever heard it like that. Anytime we talk about being narrow-minded, it's typically in a bad context, as if you're limited, that you're missing things, that you have things not figured out, that maybe you're naive. But Jesus is going to talk about his way being narrow, and it is absolutely good news. I was having a conversation with a friend here at City Church last week, and we were having conversations around spiritual practices, right? Some of the things that we do to partner in our life with Jesus in our formation, like reading Scripture and gathering as a church and, going to the prayer room and serving others, things like that, right? Different spiritual practices. And there's lots of variety in the spiritual practices, and they had some mentors that were speaking into their life, but they were saying it, and basically it was my way or the highway. You ever had a conversation like that? Where it's like, if you don't read the Bible in this way at this time, 6:30 a.m. in this version, then God definitely is not going to show up, right? It was kind of, I'm being a little facetious, but it was kind of like that. And I used the words, I was like, wow, I think they care a lot in this conversation. However, their advice seems pretty narrow-minded. Those my words that I used this week. And then we get to Jesus, and he's like, enter the narrow gate. And I'm like, crap. Hold on, let me see. How do I reconcile these two words? Now, to be clear, there is a way that you can be narrow and it's not a good thing. Would you agree? There is a way to be narrow and it's not a good thing. There is a way to be narrow and it does not lead to life. We can think of the Pharisees, the religious leaders of Jesus' day, who were wildly narrow and it led to death, not life. In fact, a lot of Jesus' really strong language is toward those religious leaders. And the issue is they would reduce God's law to such a space where it's like pigeonholed rules and regulations and do all of these things, and then God will love you and be pleased with you. And so Jesus is absolutely not down on that kind of narrowness. But his words are still here with us this morning. You must take the narrow way if you want to follow me and find life. So again, Jesus is being narrow in a vital way. Let's talk about that for a moment. Narrowness. It demands focus. It demands intensity. There's lots of things in life that are narrow and produce life. Would you agree? Well, let's think about it for a moment. Any doctors in the room? We got a couple of doctors in the room, nurses, different things like that. Anybody? No doctors? One doctor. Thank you. There we go. Very good. We do have a lot of doctors. They're all saving people's lives right now. Well done. But if you have any kind of doctorate, right, then it's 8 years of narrowness so that you can then put your hands to something that gives life. Would you agree? Everyone that I've ever talked to that has worked toward their doctorate is a slave to the narrowness of that 8 years. It is a lot of narrowness, but it produces life. Does that make sense? So narrowness is not always a bad thing, but again, I think we have to think about what Jesus is after. World-class musicians, right? If you want to be a world-class musician, you have to lean into the narrowness of practicing some ridiculous amount to get those 10,000 hours under your belt, 8 to 10 hours a day, if you want that. Why? Because there is a freedom on the other side of practice. There's a freedom on the other side of narrowness that allows you to then play without thinking about it, right? Any musicians in the room that have put in the work and know what it looks like just to lean into a key, to put fingers to a fretboard, to put your lips to a clarinet or a trumpet or whatever, and to have enough practice under your belt that then you are free to engage in music and it's free flowing and it's creative. Any musician in the room understands what I'm talking about. There is a narrowness that leads to life. If you're building a business, like the business that my brother and I have been building for the last couple of years. Car washing, right? Quality is everything. Quality. There is a narrowness to our business to maintain quality if we want it to continue to grow. As we hire people, if we don't have a narrowness in the effort of quality that we're producing in the people that we hire, it will be compromised and the business will flounder. Would you agree? So it's a good tactic to be narrow in your business. Let's go to the gym. Everybody's favorite conversation. Everyone in here knows that abs are made in the kitchen. And I hate that. I hate that because we have Voodoo Donuts down the street and I like to eat what I want, okay? And so abs are made in the kitchen. There is a narrowness to eating healthy, sleeping well, going to the gym at a regular basis that produces the body that you want, hopefully not just for vanity, but for the purpose of performance, right? That whatever if you're training for a marathon or if you're some kind of an athlete or you just want to be able to bend over and pick up your grandkids, right? Like whatever, there is a narrowness to caring for your body that produces life. Would you agree? Okay, so listen, we're just following the logic is all I'm trying to get us to do for a moment. Now, everybody familiar with Pikes Peak here? You guys familiar with this mountain? Okay, it's a 14er in our backyard, right? It's the one that you can see most often from 25, etc. So this is Pikes Peak. And Pikes Peak, I've actually not done it yet. It's been on my list. I've done a couple of 14ers, and this is the one that I have not done, not for any particular reason, just haven't made it around to it. But Pikes Peak has a section called the Narrows. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? The Narrows? You might not call it that when you get up there, but if you Google it, that's what it's called, okay? So since I don't have experience, I'm just going to talk about it for fun over here. So Pikes Peak has this scramble, and then the Narrows, through the keyhole, all these crazy, here's what you need to know. Apparently, there's a section in the Narrows of Pikes Peak where you get up there, and at its like smallest, there is a 3-foot section of like overhang cliff that you have to kind of scooch along to get to the final ascent. Okay, and I've even heard there's like some bars there to hold on to. Am I right on that? Like they put some bars in there in order to help you not fall to your death. Sounds, yeah? Okay, so the reason it matters is because on the other side is just a straight drop off. It's a cliff. There's no options. There's a narrowness to Pikes Peak, right? And I think that's the idea that we're looking at when Jesus is talking about the narrowness of his way. What does narrowness require when you get on Pikes Peak? Like there's some shimmying, there's intentional footsteps, there's like, you're holding onto the bars and you're kind of stepping over some boulders, and right, there's not a lot of margin to mess around at that environment. Would you agree? Right, so that's what Jesus has on offer here, is there is a narrowness to his way, which takes careful attention and effort, and it does indeed lead to life, but it's not without it's not without effort. And I think that's the opposite, right? The wide way is zero effort. It takes nothing for you and I to walk in the wide way. So let's talk about it. In spiritual things, Jesus is saying, you've got to be narrow. You've got to be narrow-minded when it comes to Jesus' way. If I find life in fullness through narrowness in all these other categories, would it not make sense that I find life in fullness through narrowness in the way of Jesus? How is that possible? Why would it be that way? Well, is it possible that Jesus being not only like flesh and blood, born of a virgin, God in a bod, right? Not just that, but also creator God. Is it possible that he's built narrowness into the fabric of human existence and the fabric of the universe? That narrowness leads to life? So again, this logic, let's just aim at your heads this morning. Let's get to our hearts for a moment. So when it comes to this conversation, for Jesus, there are only two roads when it comes to spiritual matters. There are only two roads when it comes to spiritual matters. And this is quite blunt. This is quite clear. This is unmistakable, and it's meant to be. For Jesus, he's leaving no neutrality, no middle ground. One road goes one direction and leads to life. One road goes another direction and leads away from life. Right? There is no fork in the road. There's no hanging out in the middle. There's two roads and two ways and two destinations, and two groups of people. And it's intentional. And here's the issue that I think you already know, is that this teaching from Jesus, alongside many others, this is not two verses out of context. This teaching, alongside many others from Jesus, put him and then his followers as a result on a collision course with the wisdom or the perceived wisdom of our day and age. Would you agree? Yeah. And what's interesting is it wasn't necessarily that way maybe like backwards 150, 200 years ago, but in the age of enlightenment where we find ourselves, in the age of tolerance, etc., these words from Jesus, well, they got him killed in that moment, and then it's no surprise that there's some rocks to throw at his followers. Now, the assumption with these two roads and two destinations from Jesus, the assumption from the Enlightenment is that all spiritual matters lead to the same place. Right? That's the assumption in our culture. All spiritual matters lead to the same place. So back to our Pikes Peak analogy for a moment. You guys have that picture again? Okay, so the assumption, let's just say like post-Enlightenment, you backwards a little bit. The assumption is all spiritual matters are leading to the same peak. So many of you have seen this analogy before, right? There's multiple routes to get to the top of Long's Peak. Did I call it Pikes Peak earlier? Sorry. Everybody's like, you idiot. You don't even know what you're talking about. I know what I'm talking about. I know. Okay. That's awesome. You're like, not even in the same city, dude. My bad. Hey, I knew. It's in here. All right, very good. It's default. Sorry, friends. Hey, that was funny. There you go. I know what I'm talking about. I do. Probably. That's a good start. All right, Long's Peak. Let's fast forward. They're both mountains. They both high up in the air. I mean, come on. All right, very good. Long's Peak. That's funny. Long's Peak has multiple routes to get to the top, okay? So there is a view, especially in our like tolerant Western post-Enlightenment cultural context, where all roads lead to the same place. All roads lead to heaven, or whatever version of it you want to call it, right? And Jesus seems to be pushing directly up against that view. To say absolutely not. Not all roads are leading to the same place. And this is kind of where it gets uncomfortable with some people. Wait, you're telling me that there's only spiritual life to be found in Jesus? You're telling me that good-intentioned, well-meaning people all over the planet that are pursuing a different way are indeed heading in a direction away from life? You're telling me that sincere people all over the planet who have not found Jesus to be the answer to life's greatest questions are heading in the wrong direction? And our answer is not to take beef with City Church or with Drake, but to look at Jesus. And it seems to be that Jesus is saying you can be sincere in one direction and be sincerely wrong. And this does not sit well in 2025 in the cultural context we find ourselves. Now, here, one of the reasons it doesn't sit well is because as soon as we start to press on this uncomfortability, many of you have stories and examples of people who carry this stance, but then also carry an aggressive, ugly attitude behind it. This condescension, talking down to, an ugliness of spirit and character. And I want you to know that couldn't be further from the truth, that when Jesus delivers any of this, it is full of compassion and conviction. That he's not going to compromise truth, but he's also not going to compromise compassion simultaneously, which is where many people in the way of Jesus, or that claim the way of Jesus, have got it wrong. So for what it's worth, have you ever had someone yell at you on the side of the street telling you that you're going to hell, right? Like with their little sign or their bullhorn or whatever, right? Went to the happiest place on earth last year with our family at Disneyland. Were we at land? We were at land. Disneyland. And there's a dude at the gate of Disneyland as you walk into the happiest place on earth with a bullhorn. Turn or burn. Sanctify or French fry. Get saved or microwave. That's funny. I made those up. He didn't actually say those things, right? But absolutely, right? Like genuinely, right? Someone who takes a conversation like this from Jesus and then turns it into that. And I just, with all humility, would say, I can't imagine that's Jesus' posture in this conversation. So let's lean in. For Jesus, there are two roads, only two roads, and two destinations. Jesus, John 14, Jesus' best and closest friend on the planet, John, wrote the other eyewitness accounts. We have the four Gospels, the accounts of the life of Jesus. So John, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're in Matthew. John's another one. And John, in John 14, he captures the words of Jesus. I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. Another place, Jesus would call himself the gate, the very gate we are to enter into life. So here's what we have to do. We have to reconcile all of Jesus. You can't take pieces of Jesus. He leaves no room for that. We have to reconcile all of Jesus. Acts chapter 5 was written by Luke. Luke was a doctor. He wrote another one of our Gospels. So you have Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then Luke wrote Acts. So this kind of 2-volume set of Jesus in the early church. Incredible. Acts chapter 5. Early church is launching. And he captures the words, I think it's of Peter. It says that there's no other name among men by which we can be saved. No other name. So we have to be able to reconcile these things in the way of Jesus. So in its essence, Tim Keller says, in its essence, Christianity sounds quite bigoted, right? Like, when you set it up like this, you're having a casual conversation at a coffee shop with a neighbor you just met. Okay, right, here we go. This is pretty rough. And our natural tendency is to try to soften the words of Jesus. But again, if his words lead to life, if Jesus himself leads to life, then maybe we don't have to defend him like we think we do. Maybe we just need a better understanding of what Jesus is actually inviting us into. And maybe we also need to remember that we're not defending ourselves, but rather we get to point people to Jesus, right? Drake can get it wrong. Pike speak, long speak, right? But Jesus is consistent. Now, the issue with Christianity sounding bigoted is it's just untrue. There's an internal contradiction when you follow the logic. I'll give you this just for a moment, and then we'll move on in the text. But there is a way of thinking in our culture that basically says you cannot believe that your religion is correct. You cannot believe that your way is the only way. That is bigoted. There's no room for that. There is a position that all religions are subjective. All religions are equally correct. It's the mountain with the same top scenario. And the point is, Jesus' words are simply not leaving room for that. Not in this passage and not anywhere else in the New Testament scriptures, as well as the other authors of scripture. But one of the ideas is if all roads lead to the same mountaintop, if every way is correct, well, then you should not ever share your beliefs with anybody else. You should never, whatever word you want to use, evangelize, right? Because all roads are the same, so how dare you share your idea? And what I need you to know is this is, often called like religious relativism, right? Or universalism, right? The idea that all roads are leading to the same place. And you're familiar with it. You live in one of the most unchurched cities in America, right? And no rocks to throw at all. You just need to know, right? These are the waters that you swim in daily and as a nation as well. But here's what's ironic, is by someone urging me not to share my religion, which I wouldn't call it that, but that's fine. By someone urging me not to share my religion with others, they're urging their religion on me simultaneously. The religion of religious relativism is a way of thinking. And so Tim Keller says it this way. He's like, it's ironic because you're evangelizing me not to evangelize, right? Like, you're telling me not to do the thing that you're telling me not to do, right? And so 200 years back up, pre-enlightenment, and people from all different walks of life could get together in the same room, all different belief systems, and we could say, okay, we don't all agree, but simultaneously, we all can't be right. And now people want to get in the same room and say, well, everybody could be right. It's like the participation trophy that they hand out at kids' soccer games, right? Like, hey, everybody's a winner. No, they're not. They're not winners. And you're setting them up for a failure, right? You're not helping them understand the concept of winners and losers, right? Like, this is important. So in the same manner, right? Like, we just have to acknowledge the moment and cultural time that we live. Is that okay? Okay. Now, the idea that everyone is right is pretty prominent in this moment, but here's also what's fun, is that if you don't agree with me that everyone is right, you're wrong, right? And that's a contradiction. Do you guys see the logic? It's just a logical fallacy that you can circle about. Here's the point. You can get in those arguments all day long, and that's fine. Tim Keller's a wizard. If you haven't picked up The Reason for God by Tim Keller, it's so helpful, so compassionate, so logical. But know that Jesus is not just after your head. He's after your heart. And he matters. He absolutely cares. Like, he didn't ask you to sign your brain away in all logic by following him by any means. But know that transformation is not limited to the head. Now, Jesus' followers don't get a choice here. Jesus is the only person of any major world religion on the planet that has ever claimed to be God. Right? Not Buddha, not Muhammad, not Confucius. No one has ever claimed the claims of Jesus himself. And so here's what it means. If he's right, then he is the only way to God. And if he's wrong, then he can't be a way. He's an absolute lunatic, right? So the big idea, if you miss other things, Jesus is either saying two things. He's either the way or he is no way. And that's not Drake's opinion. That is the words of Jesus leave no room for anything other than this. He is either the way or he is no way. He's either who he says he is and he can do what he said he would do in your life and mine, or he's an absolute lunatic, but he cannot be both. And so while people can admire Jesus' teachings from a distance, and totally fine, nothing wrong with that, right, we've talked about that periodically, but when it comes to the holistic claims of Jesus, he leaves us with only two options. Is everybody on the same page? Okay, this is just something you have to wrestle with. Listen, so don't take beef with me or whatever. And listen, I know the tension of the conversations that you're having in the world around you, all of that, absolutely. Listen, the big question is, what will you do with Jesus himself? What will you do with Jesus himself? Because if Jesus is correct, then it changes everything. But if he is incorrect, then it changes everything, right? There's two sides to this coin. But if he is correct and you disagree, well, it makes sense. Of course, there are consequences now and forever if Jesus is correct and I choose to avoid his way. Of course, it makes sense. Would you agree? It makes sense. If Jesus is who he said he is, he can do and will do and will continue to do what he said he would do, and I disagree with him, well, then of course there are consequences on the other side, both now and forever, up against that reality. So let's just deal with Jesus today. Is that okay? Okay, let's keep going. So Jesus describes these two ways. Let me just break them down for you really fast. Matthew 7 again. Enter by the narrow gate. The gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. So we have this like broad or wide way, and then we have this hard and narrow way. The wide way, right? It's very simply Jesus is saying most people are on this way. It takes zero effort to be on this way. In fact, I think we could argue that you were born into this way of just walking the wide path. And this is startling on purpose. Jesus is absolutely trying to shake his listeners into the reality that they are forced to make a decision. He wants us to evaluate our way. Just like you're on the top of Long's Peak, that's where you are, and you're at the 3-foot section, and you have to give incredible attention to where you place your feet. Would you agree? No one in here, like very few people are just kind of like, it's not a big deal. Let's just go for it, skip through it a little bit, see how it goes. You're going to pay attention to where your feet are going. He's trying to call us into that same reality when it comes to our spiritual lives and how it affects the rest of our life, to give deep consideration to your current way of life. And the idea of a wide way, think of it like a road, a highway, if you will, or the like kind of a modern idea of that. There's no resistance in a wide way. Nothing has to change. Everything can go through it, including lots of clouds. So it's kind of like where all the current is going, but also lots of people, right? It's just wide and open and zero resistance. And so the good news that Jesus brings us is that you must be born again, that you're headed on this wide way toward destruction and you need new life. And that new life is found in a narrow way by trusting in Jesus. You must receive life. You must receive forgiveness from God through Jesus in order to have this life that he has on offer. And that's a narrow way. But on the other side of a narrow way is life to the full. On the other side of carb cutting is a 6-pack or close to one. It makes sense. Now again, why is this way easy? Because you're born into it. It's where everyone naturally is heading. If you were born in America, then you didn't have to try very hard. Odds are that you did not have to try very hard to learn English, right? It just kind of happened, right? But if you want to learn a new language today, especially if you're an adult, it actually takes a ton of work. Would you agree? Like a ton of work to learn a new way of talking, right? That's the idea, right? The wide way is just like this is happening to you. We talk about it all the time. All you have to do to be formed tomorrow is to wake up. That the culture has no problem around you forming you in a direction, and Jesus is calling us to a counter-cultural way. And everyone is born into thinking that we have what it takes, right? Like every other religion on the planet is the same. They say, hey, here's how to reach for God. If you're going to lean into spirituality, here's how to reach for God. Here's the things that you need to do, X, Y, and Z, and there's a lot of different ways to do it, but same mountaintop, so once you get there, bam, you're reaching for God, and that reach will pay off. You're not as desperate as maybe some other people. Nah, man, you got it together. Just give it a little bit of effort, reach in this direction, get your life together, and you'll find life at the top of the mountain. And Jesus says, would you stop reaching? Stop reaching. You can't get there. There's not enough reaching you will ever be able to do to get to God. But the good news is God is reaching for you. And all you have to do is receive it. Jesus says that my situation, your situation is so desperate that God has to reach out to us. Otherwise, there is no hope. But it's exactly who Jesus is and what he came to do. God reaching out to us. Emmanuel, the Christmas story, God with us. Up to this point, you might have been trying to do it by yourself, but Jesus says, if you will turn to me, you will have life. Zero effort to be on this road. But once you find life, in the way of Jesus, it changes everything. Not narrow and hard. Why is the way of Jesus narrow? Why is the way of Jesus difficult? It's hard and difficult. Again, similar to kind of the Long's Peak conversation, it makes sense that a more narrow path is going to be more difficult. Has anybody ever gone like backpacking? So not just a casual 14-hour hike, but like the big backpack on, right? You load everything down and it's heavy on its own and you're already a little wonky and you're doing, right? So imagine trying to do the Long's Peak the narrows with like, an 85-pound pack on your back simultaneously, right? That immediately gets more complicated. Would you agree? Right? Because now, this I can shimmy pretty good, but if it's all of this, then I've got a lot more in the way of this narrowness, right? So Jesus is making it clear, hey, there are some things that you have to let go of if you want to walk in the narrow way. This is where Jesus uses other language, like if you want to follow me, you got to pick up your cross daily and follow me. Or right? Like if you want to follow me, you need to die to yourself and then you'll find life. If you want to follow me, you put your hand to the plow and no one looks back. There's some hard stuff that Jesus says, but it's compassionate. As in, he wants you to succeed on this narrow way. As in, he's made a way for you, and there are some things that maybe need to be stripped off in order to walk in this way. And Jesus just continues to get more and more personal, which is not exactly what we're after. We're like, I really just came to church to learn some new things. And Jesus is like, hey, let's set aside theology for a minute, and let's talk about your life. Let's talk about your pride. Let's talk about your habits with money. Let's talk about the things that you do to take the edge off at the end of a week or every evening. Let's talk about what's going on in your world, how you're handling stress and anxiety. Let's talk about the conflict that you're dealing with, the unresolved bitterness that you're holding in your heart. Hey, let's talk about that broken relationship that you walked away from and that you are holding unforgiveness toward that person. Let's talk about those things. No thanks, Jesus. I like the wide path over here, right? So you see the invitation from Jesus to get more and more personal. Tim Keller says that on the narrow path, there is no room for our righteousness. It's like that giant pack on our back, that I've got all that it takes. God should be so pleased and proud of me. I've got all my stuff together. He says there's no room for that on the narrow way. That you can't come to God unless you first acknowledge what Jesus has done for you. Now here's the good news. All you have to do to enter the narrow way, all you have to bring to enter the narrow way is nothing. It's to just empty yourself and say, Jesus, I need you. That everything that you have carried, everything that you have done, everything that you are is enough for me to enter the gate and the way. My pride is too big to fit on the narrow way. Can't squeeze it in there. But all you need is nothing to enter the kingdom of God by the grace of God. Now, life and destruction. Let's begin to kind of wrap it up with some practical application, because right now we're kind of like in the theological realm, life and death and way, and it sounds cool, very good, got it. Life and destruction. One way leads to life. The other way leads to destruction. Jesus makes it clear that he is the way that leads to life, as in every other way leads to destruction. And that terminology has a now and forever connotation. So not just talking about what happens when you die. Jesus has a view of reality that impacts both now and not yet, both today and the future. That you and I are going to live forever somewhere. But he also has the life that we're living now on his heart and mind. And so in order to give you, before we get into just a really simple application of the two ways, some practical ways to look at it, C.S. Lewis has this beautiful quote that I thought I would share with you that I think is really helpful. Now I want you to understand that C.S. Lewis is writing during the time of World War II. That on his mind is the fresh reality of the Nazi regime, of the Holocaust, of incredible evil in the world, right? So he's writing from an idea of victory, of invasion, if you will, that the Allies are invading Germany, right? The Battle of Normandy, all that stuff, and all those things are good things. Would you agree? Right? So you understand, right? We hear the word invasion, sometimes it sounds kind of like hostile. No, listen, right? The invasion on the other side was to win the war, to set the world free from evil, right? So C.S. Lewis, as he writes, as he uses the word invade, for example, he has in mind good overcoming evil. He has in mind life and wholeness and freedom coming to the world. So listen to his words, fresh in that reality. Why is God landing in this enemy-occupied world in disguise, speaking of Jesus, and starting a sort of secret society to undermine the devil? Why is he not just landing in force, invading it? Is it that he is not strong enough? Well, Christians think that he's going to land in force. We don't know when. But we can guess why he is delaying. He wants to give us the chance of joining his side freely. He goes on. God will invade. But I wonder whether people who ask God to interfere openly and directly in our world quite realize what it will be like when he does. When that happens, it is the end of the world. When the author walks onto the stage, the play is over. God is going to invade, all right. But what is the good of saying you are on his side then, when you see the whole natural universe melting away like a dream or something else? Something that never even entered your head to conceive comes crashing in. Something so beautiful to some of us and so terrible to others that none of us will have any choice left. He goes on. For this time, it will be God without disguise. Something so overwhelming that it will strike either irresistible love or irresistible horror into every creature. It will be too late then to choose your side. There is no use saying you choose to lie down when it has become impossible to stand up. That will not be the time for choosing. It will be the time when we discover which side we really have chosen, whether we realized it before or not. Now, today, this moment is our chance to choose the right side. God is holding back to give us that chance. It will not last forever. We must take it or leave it. I think he does a good job of helping us wrestle with the tension in the words of Jesus here today. So here you have it, friends. Jesus saying, I am the gate that leads to life. Enter by the narrow gate. A few observations about now and forever. When it comes to this conversation, I think you know this, but the way of Jesus and the way of Boulder are not heading in the same direction. And we could multiply that to the West, and that's fine, the world. But the way of Jesus and the place you call home, they're not heading in the same direction. They're typically two different ways. So the way of Boulder, follow your heart. Be your own king or queen. Experience the kingdom without the king. Create it yourself. The way of Jesus, trust in him as king, as Savior, as Lord, and let him rule and reign over your life and through your life. The way of Boulder, right? If we went back to the Beatitudes, blessed are the poor in spirit, right, from Jesus. The way of Boulder is, blessed is the individualist, the educated, the experienced. Blessed are those who who hunger for craft coffee and microbreweries in the afternoon. For theirs is the kingdom, right? That's what Boulder sounds like. For Jesus, blessed are the poor in spirit, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, those who know they need God. Boulder is the way of theological autonomy. Don't let anyone else define what's true for you. Live your own truth, live your own way. And the way of Jesus is to build our life under his authority, under the authority of scriptures, within the context of community, as we trust in God. The way of Boulder is to be appropriately angry with the right people, and then express your frustration in appropriately and sometimes inappropriate ways, but it's okay because you can excuse it because their behavior is so poor that yours is acceptable. Blame, shift, etc. The way of Jesus is to bless and not curse, to forgive, to reconcile, to put aside an offense. The way of Boulder is to indulge and give free rein to sexual desire, that your sexuality is central to your identity, and any restriction on any of that is absolute oppression to your individuality. And the way of Jesus says, honor God and others with our bodies and our minds through sexual fidelity, faithfulness to the way of Jesus. The way of Jesus calls us to a much higher view of sexuality, not a lower view. When it comes to the culture around us, a higher view of marriage, not a lower view. The way of Jesus says you will not be mastered by anything but Jesus himself. And then you can freely serve those around you. The way of Jesus says when you marry someone, stay committed to them. Boulder says marry somebody as long as they make you happy. And the way of Jesus says actually the moments when they're making you the least happy is the opportunity you have to grow in sacrificial love, to stay committed, to set aside your offense in the way of Jesus. The way of Boulder says use your words in every circumstance you can to manipulate and get ahead. And the way of Jesus says, be truthful and honoring with your words. Over and over, right? We could do this all day, one way or the other. And what's interesting is for some of you, as you wrestle with the way of Jesus, you put some words of Jesus into practice, even though you're not sure what you believe about him yet, and you're finding life there. That's what's cool, is that there's life, even when there's tension in the way of Jesus. You're like, there's something underneath this here. I met with someone recently, and they just started following Jesus, and they were talking to me about how things are changing from the inside out, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. They're like, my desires are changing. Some of the things that like make total sense to give all of myself to, like they're just not as satisfying as they used to be. And there's like this underlying reality. My desires are changing, and I'm finding life in the way of Jesus, even though in some ways it's like I'm doing less of what feels good. And he says it all with confusion. And I love it. I'm like, yeah, sounds like the way of Jesus to me. You see, some of you have made the decision to follow Jesus, and you're just experiencing how narrow that road is. And it's hard, right? The words of Jesus are ringing true today. You're like, man, the way of Jesus is so hard. It is hard. It's challenging. It takes intention, absolutely. But others of you are being invited today for the first time to trust in Jesus, to take the narrow way. To take the narrow way. Now, before we get it confused, I think we have to say this as we close our time. The narrow way is not producing the love of God in your life. The narrow way is not accrediting certain ideas and certain merits to your account so that God is pleased with you. The narrow way follows the gate that you choose. So we enter the narrow way by the gate. That's Jesus himself. It's the love and the compassion and the mercy and the grace of God that sees all of you, your entire story, the good and beautiful parts, the broken parts. And he says, I've been reaching for you. And we trust in Jesus. We receive his grace. We receive his forgiveness. We receive new life. And then we begin to walk in his way. And we find that with every step comes more and more life. We're not earning favor in that way. We are experiencing life as we continue to follow our Lord, our King, and our Rabbi. So why would you choose the narrow way? Other than, I don't think Jesus is even trying to scare people into a decision, right? There's no, post-Halloween jitters here where we're like, oh no, what's going to happen when you die? I think it matters. You should take account to where your path is leading you. I think Jesus wants you to do that, absolutely. Life after death, all of that, but also life today. But here's the compelling reality for me, and I hope for you today, is that Jesus, very simply, took the narrow way for you. Why would I choose to trust in Jesus? Why would I choose the narrow way? Because, friends, Jesus has already chosen the narrow way on your behalf. What do you mean? Jesus stepped out of heaven, born of a virgin, born into a narrow manger, born into infancy, grew up and lived 100% human life just like you and I, emptied himself of his divine attributes, was rejected, was persecuted, was ultimately beaten and flogged and hung on a cross. His body was pierced, his body was beaten, his blood was shed on our behalf. He chose a narrow way for you. There was only one way to save us from our sin. There was only one way to redeem us, to buy us back into the family of God. And that was with his perfect life that you and I can't live. That was with his death that we deserve to die. That was with his power that raised him from the grave, and that anyone that would trust in Jesus, that life is available to them. Enter by the narrow gate. Why would I choose the narrow way? It's not just theologically and mentally sensible. That's fine. And true. I think it's great. We could have that conversation, but it's also absolutely beautiful. And friends, I think for some of you, you're up here and you're wrestling it. You're just trying to put all these, like a Rubik's Cube with Jesus. You're like, oh, come on. And you need to know, listen, that's great. Do the work. But also let it touch your heart. That the way of Jesus is reliable, and his provision is beautiful, and the love of God will change everything for you. You don't have to earn his love. Receive it today and walk in new life. Now, as we close our time, There's a couple other things that you have the permission to take next steps in. So I'm going to invite you to take a moment. You can close your eyes with me. And that's just to remove distraction, okay? Like, that's not like a super spiritual thing to do. You and I would close our eyes just to remove distraction. Maybe if you're like me, you like to flip your hands up in your lap, just in a posture of openness, a posture of surrender, a posture of receiving, whatever's helpful for you. And let's just take a moment and listen to see what God has for us. For some of us, it is a very clear invitation today to trust in Jesus, to ask Him to save you, and to begin to follow Him. And I would very simply say to you, if that's you today, if your heart is tender, if your heart is soft toward that reality, then trust in Jesus today. You don't have to have it all figured out. He's not scared of your doubts and your whatabouts and your what ifs, but you can trust in Jesus today. Others of us in the room, we are following the way of Jesus, but there are other ways that seem compelling simultaneously. There are ways in our sexuality, ways in our relationship to money, ways in our relationship to dating, ways in our relationship to work, ways in our relationship to identity, ways in our relationship to conflict resolution, ways in our relationship to childhood trauma. There are all kinds of different things that maybe we're wrestling with today. And the invitation is to trust in Jesus once again, to trust His way. And maybe for you, it's not just going back to Jesus and confessing, man, I've been trying to hold two ways together at the same time, and I want to trust in you once again in this particular area. Maybe it is that, but maybe it's also confession, getting it out of the dark into the light. Maybe it's bringing in accountability, that you're not meant to walk this way alone. Yes, it is narrow, but it is with Jesus and with His church, with His community. So maybe the Holy Spirit will be highlighting those things for you today. Maybe it's the narrowness of this good news that is going to lead you to get baptized, to go under the water and to come back up, to declare what Jesus has done on the inside of your life externally, that you have died and Jesus has made you new. Whatever Jesus is calling us to do this morning, I would encourage you to trust His voice through His Spirit and say yes, because, friends, it will lead to life. So, Father, would you take the time that we have to respond in worship and song and communion? Would you continue to meet us here? And I pray specifically, I think there's some people that are seeking that experience with you, and not just that their heads would reconcile what's true, but that their hearts would know the love of God, like Paul speaks to in Ephesians 3. And God, I pray this week that the prayer room would be an incredible space of encounter with you, that people could come into a really significant encounter of experiencing the love of God. Not because the room itself is special, but because they're setting aside an hour of their time to seek you. And God, would they find your word still to be true? When you seek, you will find. Others of us in the room, we're going to go to the prayer room. Would you remind us of that love? Will we experience a taste of your goodness fresh and new? But then also, God, would you remind us of the privilege we have to partner with you in seeing many other people come to know your incredible love and grace through our words, through our actions, through this church in the West and the world. We give you the rest of our time. Amen.